This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting today's show is K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor with a cattle market update. He discusses feedlot returns, the upcoming meat demand monitor, and events where people can learn more about the cattle market. Antonina Broyaka, K-State associate in the Department of Agricultural Economics, continues the show with an update on Ukraine. They continue to experience conditions highly unfavorable to agriculture production. Rounding out today's show is K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken with information on snakes. He shares about how snakes contribute to the ecosystem. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned into Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show, as we normally do, with a cattle market update. And for today's cattle market update, we have K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. Glynn, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be on.
Talking about the cattle market, starting with cash cattle market.
Yeah, so this past week was mixed depending on what weight class we'd be talking about. So let's talk feeder cattle first. USDA called the prep market $5 to $8 higher, depending on what weight class we might quote. Two of the larger head lots that I took note of. 117 head weighing 812 pounds went for $246. 159 head came in at 958 pounds, went for $240. Both of those would be a solid $5 higher from the week before. We continue to have strength in the feeder cattle market would be the punchline of that. The volume is lower, as we've talked in other settings, but it is above. The reason I said this was mixed was fed cattle was more flat. So AMS called the 5 area fed cattle, really both Thursday and Friday last week, flat at 180. That's basically what it was the week before. When you look over to the board, CME Friday contracts closed. We have both August nearbys for live and feeder cattle. Live cattle was 178, down about $2 for the week. And then feeder cattle was 246, about flat for the week. So more strength in the feeder cattle cash market than the other markets I was breaking down there.
And then what about for box beef cutout?
Yeah, so we had basically flat, kind of a boring week there, which is consistent with the fed cattle story here. Choice closed the week at 302, was off about $1 from the week before, and Select was at 278, up about $1. No major action there as well. This is usually where I interject. It was a fairly calm week overall. And, probably for at least 3 years now, we've had lots of uncalm weeks, right? Lots of surprises, excitement, whatever. But I actually think it's healthy for markets to be calm and boring, establish a footing and so forth. And I interject that because the majority of the numbers I shared here were small changes, that's still a healthy thing for markets. Talking
of feedlot returns, what are we seeing for right now?
Yeah, so most of your listeners know I update these once a month. Take production-type info from the Animal Science and Industry Department and marry it up with, Kansas fed cattle, feeder cattle, and corn prices. These were last updated July 7th, and I've been on the road, so we're here late getting these to folks. But actually, the live cattle market's been flat or up since then, and corn's up just a little bit, but less so. So these returns are probably even a little bit better today than the numbers I'm going to share. But regardless, the projected returns for steers leaving Kansas yards, if you have not hedged them, so if you're in just like a totally exposed cash market situation, are $150 or more per steer between now and Christmas. So specifically, steers leaving the yard in December are projected to have a positive return of $159 per head. The high water mark is actually in November, is $261, October is $256. There's multiple months in here of over $200 positive returns. What that reflects on balance is the fed cattle market has strengthened since those cattle were placed. So they would have been placed, 5 to 7 months earlier at lighter weights. And there's been some ongoing improvement in the cost of gain. Admittedly, the last couple of weeks, corn's went up, but overall, corn is cheaper and more generally, cost of gain is lower. So both sides of that profit margin have improved since the cattle were placed. Once we get into 2024, things look a little bit different. We're projecting small losses, and the volume going through feed yards is probably going to continue to shrink. So utilization of your feed yard is a bigger deal. But for the next 6 months, it does look, cattle that are in the yard today are in a pretty nice spot.
What are we seeing for the meat demand monitor?
Here at K-State, we maintain multiple meat demand measures, some of which are more recent and survey-based, and that is the meat demand monitor, and others are more USDA, a little bit more backward-looking, historical-based, and when those are updated varies. So the meat demand monitor, which is the resource that's beef and pork checkoff supported, is ongoing. We collect data every day, as I said, national survey based. The July data collection just ended, and by the time this week is over, I anticipate the July report will be posted to Ag Manager. What is available there is a little bit more dated USDA based demand indices. So we take USD data and we track both for domestic and foreign demand of U.S. beef, pork, and chicken. And the latest numbers there are for the month of May. And this is where my comment about the time lag. Some of that data comes in later, particularly the trade data, when we know what we exported and imported is a little slower to come in. But in May of 23, the all fresh beef, the pork, and the chicken demand indices for domestic consumers were all up from April, which is great. Comparing May of 23 beef and pork demand, was actually down versus May of 22. So put a bow on that. Year-over-year demand decline, but a little bit of improvement compared to April domestically. And then we flip over to foreign demand, which we don't always talk as much about, but foreign consumer demand for U.S. meat products is increasingly important over time. Again, May demand for beef, pork, and chicken by foreign consumers was up versus April. However, beef and chicken were down versus May, and pork is up almost 25%, but that's from a smaller base. When we look back at May of 22, export demand for pork was pretty low, and there's been a bit of a renaissance in the last few months. So to summarize that again for your listeners, the May data look good compared to April domestically, as well as on the foreign front, and look for in the days ahead the updated July look from the Meat Demand Monitor.
And if people are wanting to learn some more information, maybe in person, what are some conferences or places they could go to?
Yeah, so the soonest one is our Risk and Profit Conference, which is out of our AgEcon department here on campus, August 17th and 18th. We have lots of breakout sessions, so you can go to lots of 45-minute talks. Some of our grad students and fellow faculty members are topical presentations, and then there's 3 or 4 different kind of group sessions where we're all together. And one of those is a meat and livestock outlook session, which yours truly will be presenting. I'm actually the last session this year, so after our final lunch, I'll be presenting, and that'll segue into a broader Q&A. So if you want to engage on these topics, I encourage you to come visit us there. When we get into September, still our department does our Ag Lenders Conference out in Garden City first, and then here in Manhattan, Kansas on the 26th and 27th. And then the next day is actually Dale Blasi and his team over in Animal Science and Industry on the 28th have their KSU Stocker Field Day. I always like to, interject those when they're coming, not the week of, but let everybody kind of plan a little bit. Several of those are here on campus. Come join us. Hopefully you'll learn something, network, and maybe we'll have some good football to watch as well.
Ag Manager always has a lot of resources for people, and they can find your information that you're sharing with us now here later on throughout the week. And so what are some other tools that are on there?
Yeah, so the easiest way to find the resources I've already mentioned is go Ag Manager, and then across the top there's lots of kind of drop-down menus. One of them is called Contributors, and that's a list of those of us that are a little more actively presenting information on Ag Manager, and they're in alphabetical order. So go down to Tonsor, or I usually joke, look for the bald economist, logo. You'll find me there. But if you click on Tonsor, you find reverse, dated resources. These feedlot returns are monthly. These meat demand information is monthly and so forth. So you can find all that. So if this is helpful to you, please make use of that. We just updated a calf vaccination program assessment tool. It's an Excel resource for those that are trying to decide whether to enroll your calves, whether it's this year's crop or think ahead even for next year's crop, into the VAC 45, VAC 60, pre-con, those kind of additional weaning and vaccination programs versus sell at weaning or maybe an alternative vaccination program. That tool was built in partnership with Merck Animal Health. It's informed by beefbasis.com and some work we've done with Superior Livestock Auction data. So there's a lot of info I just threw at you, but the punchline is that Excel tool is used to help you make a hopefully more informed decision whether it's worth it to have the additional expense and the foregone sale of your calves to a later date at a heavier weight by enrolling them in a vaccination-based program. We've updated that, and I would make use of that as well.
And Glenn, while we're talking about all these different reports, something that Lee mentioned a little bit last week, talking about the mid-year report overall, but kind of what does that look like for Kansas?
To quickly remind our listeners, we have both the January and the July cattle inventory report. USD NASS, which is the statistics service of ag here in the U.S., does the head counting, in this case for cattle, twice a year. And it gives us a look at the size of the herd, how many heifers are being held back and the like. And forgive me, I haven't listened to what Lee said, but I will just summarize broader and then give some Kansas comments here. But big picture, we confirmed what we thought, right? The herd continues to shrink, have yet to pull the trigger on at least national expansion. And in states like Kansas, that is certainly true. Mother Nature is the primary reason the herd is smaller, not, market signals themselves. So feeder cattle prices in the upcoming couple of years look to be very attractive for those that can sustain their cow herds. But on balance, Mother Nature hasn't allowed the rebuild and the subsequent expansion. I don't know if Lee said this, but I always interject this, is I know he probably didn't plug. We have an Excel tool on our, again, Ag Manager that is called KSU Beef Replacement. So if you're in the spot where you're thinking about expanding your herd, that tool quantifies the net present value. So you could use that and update it with some of the information that was in that mid-cattle year report. But I also interject here, there's a lot of topic about whether we're expanding the national herd or not. I think it's healthy to break it down into a rebuild where I was versus a net expansion. An example I would use is if I'm a Kansas cow-calf operator and say in normal times I have 100 cows, but today I find myself running with maybe 80. So for whatever reason, in the last 2 or 3 years, I've shrunk, probably as part of my forage management strategy. The economics to get back to 100 are not only looking at the current feeder cattle market and them being attractive as my main sales price and main revenue source, but also if I add 20 more cows back, I have a 25% increase in my herd that I'm spreading my fixed cost across. So if I have the same land base, the same labor, the same John Deere tractor, whatever, kind of fairly fixed assets that I'm using in my operation, if I can get back to my previous steady state of 100, I'm spreading my max fixed cost over more head. And that alone, even if you have sort of normal feeder cattle prices, that alone's a pretty big driver. But if you are doing that and you have attractive feeder cattle prices, the carrot to rebuild and then potentially expand is even greater. I interject that because I am very confident that when Mother Nature allows us, a lot of operations that have had sort of a forced pull down in the last 2 or 3 years are going to be among those that rebuild as soon as they can, as long as they are in an equity position and their lenders support it. So the last comment here would be, is the sooner you talk to your lender about that, the better. So borrowing rates have went up, so that's also the bait to sooner to go talk. But just more generally, it takes more capital today to rebuild a herd than it did 5 years ago and certainly 25 years ago. And the sooner you can talk to your banker to line that up, the better you'll be.
That was K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. I will link the Ag Manager website in today's show notes on agtoday.net. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our show now with K-State Associate in the Department of Agricultural Economics, Antonina Broyaka, as she provides an update on Ukraine. She provided this update on July 27th. Antonina starts the conversation with what's currently happening in Ukraine.
Unfortunately, situation in Ukraine is still very, very complicated, not only on a battlefield, but also in relatively safe region. After Russia didn't get what they expected for continuing a grain deal, looks like they decided that if they cannot get over Ukraine, they're gonna destroy the most important grain infrastructure. Russian latest attack on Odessa region, where several grain farms and storage facilities were completely destroyed with hundreds of thousands tons of grain. Despite the positive results of Ukrainian counteroffensive, it goes pretty slowly because while Ukraine was waiting for military aid from Western countries, Russia built defense structures and occupied territories. They also placed missiles complex in residential areas of occupied territory using Ukrainian civilians. After termination of grain initiative, Russia showed one more time that they don't have any humanity. On the nights of July 18 and 11, Russia launched attacks on port infrastructure and grain terminals of Odessa and Chernomorsk ports that were involved in grain initiative. The night strike knocked out a significant part of the grain export infrastructure in the Chernomorsk port. According to experts, it will take at least a year to fully restore the objects that were damaged. And besides that, in the port of Chernomorsk, 100,000 tons of grain were also destroyed, which was supposed to be loaded on Panamax ships and sent through the grain corridor to China. The grain infrastructure of international and Ukrainian traders and carriers such as Kernel, Vitera, CMA, SGM Group suffered the most.
Next, she discusses the damages to the agricultural industry.
The direct damages to agriculture amounted $9 billion. Unfortunately, indirect damages exceed $40 billion. There are estimates that even the war be over this year, the sown area can reach a pre-war size not earlier than in 2030. However, production will not reach a pre-war volume due to difficulties for producers to accumulate the necessary resources to invest in increasing the yield of crops. But as per initial calculation, the explosion of Kakhovka Dam has resulted in direct damages of at least $2 billion to Ukraine. The tragedy has caused significant harm to the residential, communal, and energy sectors, as well as indirect losses to agriculture due to the loss of irrigation and in affected region. It is also known about 31 people died on a territory controlled by Ukraine. The destruction of crops, livestock, and fish stocks has resulted in agriculture damage of $25 million. The size of direct damages was limited due to the constant shelling of the territory since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, which has hindered the active utilization of agricultural land. So it's been damaged before the flood. Separately, the estimated amount of losses caused to environment is approximately $1.5 billion. It is said that around 150 tons of oil leaked during the dam explosion and went to the Black Sea. The salinity level of the Black Sea near Odessa is nearly 3 times lower than the norm. 4 nature reserves, including the Black Sea Biosphere Reserve, which is protected by UNESCO, are also within the affected area.
Things did get planted this year in Ukraine, and Antonina talks about what crops those were.
Before talking about expected harvest, let's see what Ukraine has planted. The planting campaign was completed late in some region due to different reasons. First of all, that was shortage and expensiveness of fuel, seeds, limited labor. So this year, there were planted 5.5 million hectares of winter crop and over 13 million hectares with spring grain, pulses, and oilseed, as well as 213,000 hectares with sugar beets. In particular, spring grain and legumes were planted through 5.6 million hectares, which accounting 1.4% of the forecast made by Ministry of Agriculture of Ukraine, including spring wheat, 250,000 hectares, which is 46% more than usual. Corn, over 4 million hectares, is actually 12% less than in 2022 and more than 26% than in 2021. But still, it's more than we expected because, as you remember, this year harvest for corn ended in March. And many farmers just decided to replace their corn with other crops, such as soybean and sunflower. So as for oil seeds in 2023, sunflower seeds were planted on a territory through 5.3 million hectares, 13% more than in previous year, and soybean on the area 1.8 million hectares, which is 47% more than in previous year. In terms of regions, Dnipropetrovsk and Odessa region have the largest field with wheat, over 400,000 hectares. Kirovograd, Mykolaiv, and Vinnytsia around 300,000 hectares. At the same time, some region has significant reduction in wheat crop in this year compared to previous. So in average in Ukraine, in regards to regions, it would be minus 37% of wheat sown area. Corn sown area, the largest area is in Poltava region, over 500,000 hectares, but it is 15% less than in previous year. There is a high level of decrease of corn area in Vinnytsia region, Rivne and Sumy and Dnipropetrovsk. I think that is because farmers decided to replace their corn with other crops. At the same time, in Kharkiv, we have plus 27% This because last year this territory been under occupation and we didn't have almost anything from that region. So where we are now, actually the harvesting is already started, and we expect to harvest almost 10 million hectares of grain and legumes. As for now, we harvested only 15% and already have around 5.8 million metric tons of grain, including 3.4 million tons of wheat, 2.2 million tons of barley, and almost 1.4 million tons of rapeseed. The average yields are lower, and this is understandable. Ukrainian farmers were not able to apply enough fertilizer. Vegetation calendar and agri-technologies were not followed. But even under such conditions, I think that Ukrainian fertile soil shows good yield. So total grain, legumes, and oilseeds harvest in Ukraine is expected at the level of 65-67 million tons compared to almost 74 million tons in previous year. 46 million tons of grain and legumes is expected, which is 5% less than in previous year. The focus for corn harvest is 24 million ton, which is 13 million ton less than in 2021. Wheat is around 18 million ton, almost twice less than in pre-war conditions. Sunflower seeds are expected up to 13 million tons, 4 million tons less than in 2021, but more than in previous year. So the highest expectation of wheat harvest are in Dnipropetrovsk, Kirovograd and Khmelnytsky region, over 1.4 million tons per region. 1.3 million tons is expected from Vinnytsia and actually Odessa region. The biggest decrease is expected in Sumy region, minus 30%, and also in Kharkiv region that had a lot of destruction from Russia. Average by region is minus 14%. So it will lead to, of course, decrease in export of grain, legumes, and oil seeds from Ukraine. In 23-24 marketing year is expected around 45 million tons compared to 58 million tons in previous year, which will worth $20 billion. Corn export can exceed 20 million tons, including ending stocks from the previous harvest. Wheat export is expected on around 15 million tons. Some increase is expected on soybean export up to 5 million tons, which is 2 million tons more than in previous year.
That was K-State Associate in the Department of Agricultural Economics, Antonina Broyaka. I will link her full update in today's show notes on agtoday.net. You can also find it by going to www.AgManager.info. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we end our Monday show, as we normally do, with some information surrounding wildlife. And this week, we're talking about snakes. And in to talk about it, we have K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist, Joe Gerken. Joe, thanks for joining us once again.
Thanks for having me back.
So snakes, are they becoming a little bit more active?
Yeah, so snakes are cold-blooded, and so that means that they react to their environment. So when it's cold, they're really, really slow, and when it warms up, they tend to be a lot more active. So people are seeing more snakes. They move faster. Just a little topic I thought would be fun to kind of chat about.
And snakes actually help manage a few things.
Yeah, in general, snakes are harmless, and they actually help benefit a lot of the ecosystems that we see. So one of the big factors that they can help with are controlling rodents. They eat a lot of mice and rats, which, you know, that in itself seems really beneficial. But if we let those populations get out of control of the mice and rats, they start to do things like eat a lot of the plants that we would want to have around our pond, to the point that, they might not be able to make seeds, and we might see some plant populations crash, things like that. So we think about snakes. A lot of listeners, I'm sure, aren't too excited about snakes, but they do have a lot of benefits, and one of them is helping to control some rodents.
And talking about controlling things, fish is something else that they help with controlling.
People think that if they have snakes around, they're going to be eating all of their fish and killing them off. And it's true that some snakes, especially water snakes, do eat fish. Most of the fish that they're eating, though, are sick or diseased or dying or recently dead. And so you're not really going to have any problems with snakes eating the fish that you want to keep. In fact, research has shown that if you have snakes in your pond, the fish actually grow faster and have faster growth rates. So you might actually see some benefits. That mostly comes from helping control overpopulation. So if you get too many mouths to feed in your pond, we've talked about that before. Too many mouths, not enough food, all the fish stay small. And so if we can get some of those fish out, whether that's by fishing or by having snakes, that helps our growth rates of our fish. So they're great if you want to go fishing in your pond.
And a saying I know I've heard and have said that the best kind of snake is a dead snake. However, that's really not always the case.
Well, I'm here to fight that today because I think that snakes have a lot of benefits. I get it. They're a little slithery. They move different. They're kind of scary if you don't know different kinds of snakes, and they can definitely hurt you, and they will bite you if you try to mess with them. So if you see a snake, the best thing to do is to walk the other way, let it do its little thing, live its life itself. But I would argue that the best snake is not a dead snake. They can provide a lot of benefits to us. So one situation where I would say that a snake is beneficial when it is dead is as food for a lot of other animals. And so snakes feed a lot of owls. They feed a lot of hawks. So a lot of the birds of prey that we like to see forage, some of them forage a high percentage of their diet on snakes. So there is a benefit there, but leave the killing of the snakes to the owls and the wildlife, and let's learn how to live with them.
And if you're like me and are not a fan of snakes, how can you help keep them away?
There are a few things that you can do. Again, snakes are beneficial. Let's focus on that. If you see them, normally if you walk away, they're going to be more scared of you than you are of them. So there's definitely benefits there. But doing things like keeping your grass mowed down, cleaning up rock piles or log piles, especially around your pond. Those are areas that a lot of snakes like to hang out and live at. Keeping things cleaned up, kind of eliminating some of those habitats that they really like to thrive in, is most beneficial. So that's what I would recommend if you want to keep those populations down a little bit lower.
There are, of course, snakes in Kansas, and there are some that are harmful, but there are also some that are not. And is there one that outweighs the other in Kansas?
Yeah, so most of the snakes, a vast majority of the snakes are harmless. About 90% of the snakes are non-venomous. So that doesn't mean they're not going to bite you. If you go pick one up, it's going to bite you. Snakes have curved-in teeth, too, and so a lot of times they'll bite you, and people have a tendency to kind of pull them off of you, and that it can cause a lot of bleeding. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can look really, really bad because they scratch you a lot when they bite you. But the best thing that you can do is assume that if you see a snake and you don't know what you're looking at, assume that they're dangerous. Walk away, leave them alone. Most of the time when we hear about encounters with snakes going bad, it's because people start to do things like poke at the snake, try to pick up the snake. And if someone tried to poke you or pick you up, you'd probably bite back too. So you can't be too mad at the snakes.
That was K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. That's all we have for you this Monday on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.